Afternoon, everyone. Another impromptu stream. You could almost do these every day at the moment, couldn't you? I held off on it yesterday. I'm doing it today. So, Nigel Farage with his asylum things again. I already discussed some of them. Was it 2 days ago? He's come out with another one. Now, here's something. So he's got a plan to spend UK tax money, British tax pounds, send it out of the country to the Taliban and the Iranian government to help with his asylum plans. Now, first of all, again, and I must emphasize, his asylum plans will not work. It's really, the problem is none of the journalists are asking him the really key questions because he has no answer to them. But, let's say it could work just for now. We will get onto some of the ways it won't. But let's say it could work just for now. So Nigel Farage is claiming that a crucial part of his asylum plan is paying other countries to take these asylum seekers, just like the Tories, right, with the Rwanda scheme. Okay? Nigel Farage claims he can do this for £10 billion. And that's everything, by the way. That's the total cost of everything for 600,000 migrants. It says asylum seekers, but we don't have 600,000 asylum seekers. So I don't actually know what he's talking about. Does anyone know honestly, what these 600,000 people are? But should we just say for now 600,000 migrants? Because asylum, we have 28,000. Well, at the moment we've got just over 100,000 asylum seekers, but the vast majority of those are the ones that the backlog the Tories left us by just loading them up for Labour to deal with. So they're getting through that backlog. But in terms of asylum seekers that we have, new asylum claims we have, in the last year we've had 28,000 and about half of them fail. So, half of them fail anyway. So Nigel Farage perfectly legally, without doing anything, could just do what Labour are doing and go through the process and fail half of them. So realistically, at the moment, you're talking about 14,000 refugees we're accepting. So Farage wants to get rid of those as well, the genuine refugees. Where's the 600,000 come from? About 14,000 a year. I mean, over a full parliament, a 5-term parliament, that's 70,000. So I honestly would like to know where this 600,000 coming from. But anyway, let us say that it would all work. He can withdraw from the ECHR, but he's reining back on that, you noticed yesterday as well, but come to that as well. Remove them from the ECHR, or remove us from the ECHR, remove us from a load of UN treaties as well. Let's imagine there are no negative consequences. There totally will be, but let's pretend not. He still needs somewhere to send them. He accepts he can't send them all back to their countries of origin. So he needs to send them somewhere else. He's mooted the idea of sending some to Ascension Island, right? So how much does it cost to build the facilities there? He's also saying, and he's actually said this now, he would pay the Taliban and the Iranian government to take them. Now, I've got two questions about this. First of all, he's saying that he's happy now to give British money to, the Taliban, he goes on about Islamists all the time, right? Oh, everyone that's Muslim apparently is an Islamist, right? Which is a different thing, by the way. Islamists, just to be clear, what we're talking about, when Farage uses the term, what he means is people who wish to force Islam on other people, right? In every country, including this one. So that is actually literally true of the Taliban and the Iranian government, isn't it? That is literally true of them. And it's also true that both those organisations are hostile to Britain. They're hostile to the UK. They've actually killed people for being British. There's British people locked up in Taliban jails, not for committing crimes in Afghanistan. I don't even mean, for committing crimes that shouldn't be crimes. I mean, if you go to a country, don't commit the crimes of that country. If you don't like those, if you don't think those crimes are sensible, then don't go to that bloody country, right? But, They're saying, if I remember correctly, close to 60% of asylum seekers fail here in Denmark. So the number that fail can often be proportional to like the sort of number that's claimed. Like in France, for example, the number of failures is usually greater than for Britain because it's easier to get there. So I don't know in the case of Denmark's thing. Like just a few years ago, for example, the failure rate, and this was under the Tories, right? The failure rate was about 25%. So about 75% of claims were found to be valid. So it's not like the same everywhere. It depends on how many people are sort of trying it on. It often is greater for EU countries because, again, you're sort of sharing the load a bit. But the point is, if you have a process, because I had this in the last stream, I think, didn't I? Someone was trying to say, oh, but they just say things. They just pretend they're gay or something like that, so you can't send them back type of thing. And it's like, well, no, because if it were just the case that you could make something up and therefore fiddle the system, then virtually 100% of people would pass their claim, wouldn't they? The fact that large percentages fail their claim means we must have a... Because I'm not saying, by the way, that everyone who fails their claim is not valid. Because this is a situation where, international law, refugee laws, doesn't require us to give claimants the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't, I'm not an expert on the specific process, but it doesn't require us to give the benefit of the doubt. Otherwise, we'd accept 100%, because everyone claiming asylum would just be given a crib sheet, wouldn't they? Like in America, because ICE are cracking down on immigration, legal and illegal. So various groups are like migrants in America are giving them a checklist of things to say and not say if ICE collar them. You'd do the same for potential asylum seekers, wouldn't you? They'd have a list from people saying, say this, say that, don't say this, and you'll wangle the system. But that's clearly not the case because we fail a load of people. So what I am saying is, where people pass, there must be good reason to suppose they're genuine, right? Kieran there saying he's just doing a Trump and plucking a number out of thin air. Well, he is, and I'm going to prove it. Well, sort of prove it. So Nigel Farage reckons he can deport 600,000 people in 5 years. Again, where are these 600,000 people? I don't know where they are. We don't have that many asylum seekers, right? But he reckons he's going to deport 600,000 people in 5 years for £10 billion. Well, do you remember the Rwanda scheme? So when Labour came in, obviously they cancelled it, but when Labour came in, Yvette Cooper basically threw open the books to the public. She said, right, the Tories have been keeping all this confidential. Should we have a look at what they were spending? And although the Tories basically had plans to pay over £10 billion to the Rwandan government for the Rwanda scheme. Now, let us be clear about the Rwanda scheme. What was the Rwanda scheme for? It was not for sending every asylum seeker to Rwanda. It was for sending 1,000 over 5 years. £10 billion. That's what, when Yvette Cooper threw open the books, made it all public, that's what the Tories had planned to spend on it. They hadn't spent all that much because we stopped it, right? But that was the plan. £10 billion for 1,000 asylum claimants. Nigel Farage reckons he's going to get rid of 600,000. How's that going to cost 10 billion? Now, even given, I will accept that maybe the Tories spent more than or they were going to spend more than they strictly had to, because we know they're a bit, particularly as there's suggestions that some people within senior Tories had close links with members of the Rwandan government, right? So, as well as other lobbyists in Rwanda. So, we might assume that a bit like with the COVID PPE scandal, that they were being overly generous with Rwanda, even given it, like it's just £10 billion for 1,000 versus £10 billion for 600,000. How does that work? How does that work out? It's a complete nonsense, isn't it? I mean, for goodness sake. I mean, let's just have a little look at this. I'm just going to do a quick calculation. Where's my calculator? 600,000 divided by... Oh no, sorry. That's like Farage. Right, hold on. Right, hold on. Someone. Right, let's just do this again properly. That works out about £16,500 a person. Now that's that. This is why Farage gets away with it, by the way. That sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? Oh yeah, you could totally get rid of someone for. I'll get rid of someone for £16,000, right? You know, but it's like, but no, you can't pay a country to take someone. Like, there's the cost of the flight. Remember, it costs 15,000 just to put them on a plane back to their own country. 13 to 15,000 pounds, because you've got to pay for the flight, and you think, well, that's an expensive flight ticket, Phil. Well, but you've also got to pay for the whole process. You've got to pay for, you've got to consider the cost of detaining them. So remember, Nigel Farage says he's going to build a concentration camp, right, to detain them all, to hold them, right? He hasn't called it a concentration camp, but that's what he's describing. So he's got to build the concentration camp. That's got to be staffed. So you've got to consider the cost of arresting the asylum seekers, detaining them in the concentration camp, you know, staffing that concentration camp. Then you've got to charter a plane. Then you've got the security staff that are needed to take them there. Then you've got all the costs, because the country you're sending them back to, there's a process there, right? So you've got all those costs as well, and then, you know, the plane has to come back. So all of this is known when you can do it perfectly legally to cost between 13 and 15,000 pounds. Where's the extra money to pay countries to take asylum seekers that they're not ordinarily willing to take? It's an absolute nonsense, an absolute nonsense. And also, I keep coming back to the point. I'm going to go through some comments in a minute. Sorry. I'm going to keep coming back to this point. How does he physically get the planes in the air? Because where do they go? Where do they go? If they have to pass over European countries, then what's to stop those European countries saying, hang on a minute, you may have left the ECHR, you may have withdrawn from UN refugees and human rights treaties, we haven't. They don't have to allow another country to break the law in their airspace, right? So what if the EU say, you're not allowed these flights in our airspace? And then let's say there's an alternative route you can take. I mean, I think that's a struggle, but let's say, right? So where do the planes, who's, you know, you can't just send military planes. So, and it is quite common to charter commercial flights. So let's say you charter British Airways, for sake of argument, right? So first of all, the Tories tried this. Do you remember what happened when the Tories tried it? And some flight operators refused to take those contracts because of the public backlash. So that's just a thing of pissing off customers, right? They don't want to do that. But let's say the EU, even if they weren't going to use their airspace, and I don't know how you get them to Afghanistan or Iran without going over Europe, right? But let's say somehow you manage to do it. Maybe you go over the Arctic and the other way around. I don't know. I suspect not. I'm a physicist. But anyway, what if the EU says, even if you can bypass our airspace, we're not going to allow these flight operators? What if you apply economic sanctions? Because remember, Farage is very hostile to the EU. He's not going to do work deals with the EU, right? He's hostile to them. He's happy to work with the Taliban. He's happy to work with the Iranian Ayatollah. He's not happy to work with our European neighbours, right? We know that. So he has a fractious relationship with them. What if they say, well, we'll just apply economic sanctions? No commercial operator that accepts these contracts is allowed to operate in the EU, even for just tourism. So if you had a so let's say British Airways, I'm just picking on them because they're famous, right? Could be anyone. But let's say British Airways agreed to take some of these contracts and they can find a flight path that doesn't go through EU airspace. What if the EU says, because British Airways are breaking international law, we're not going to allow them to operate in our territory under any circumstances? So British Airways then only has these contracts. Or, I mean, you can fly to America and stuff, right? But if it has to like lose all of its European market, the EU, if the EU want, and I'm not saying they will, I honestly don't know. Has anyone asked them? I don't know. But the EU could absolutely stop Farage sending these flights off. Just the threat of economic sanctions against any commercial operators who engage. And Farage cannot do it all on military aircraft. And the cost would be enormous if he had to bypass EU airspace. Dean Watson there saying it's £500,000 per flight at 5 flights a day. It's 2.5 million a day, 17.5 million a week, 910 million a year on flights. You can't bring that figure down because 80% of the cost is fuel. But again, yeah, I mean, that's so you've just worked out the actual cost of the physical flights. That's already half of his budget. And that doesn't include detaining them, securing them in concentration camps, securing them on the flights themselves, all the staff that are needed for this, as well as paying off foreign governments. The cost is pie in the sky. Like even if, and these are massive ifs, he could, because you'll notice, although he says he's going to leave the ECHR, he's also said it'll take time. Have you noticed that? Because people have said, oh, what about the Good Friday Agreement? It says, oh, well, yeah, we'll have to negotiate something else. Good luck with that, by the way, because it took long enough to agree the first version. And the DUP are now the main unionist party. They didn't like the original version. They don't want any Good Friday Agreement, like any equivalent. They don't want the Belfast Agreement. So Nigel Farage will find it impossible to negotiate. I mean, physically impossible to negotiate a replacement for it, because it was difficult enough the first time. And then all the major groups were willing to do it. And even then it took a lot of cajoling, but they were willing. Sinn Féin and the UUP were the big boys then in Northern Ireland, and they were both willing to give it a shove. The DUP are not. So he will find it impossible. But that is Farage basically saying, oh yeah, we won't be able to do all this overnight. So his 5-year plan, all of this, you're working out this cost per year, this 5-year plan, all of a sudden will have to be condensed into what? Because how long is it going to take for him to withdraw from these treaties? How long? He can't do it straight away. There will be immense political pressure not to. And of course, he will totally collapse the UK's reputation. And at that point, by the way, yes, if America is still MAGA controlled, the United States, although even then, you know, the Irish lobby in America is really powerful. Even Republicans, remember during Trump's first term, I should have remembered this, during Trump's first term, remember, even he said, do not risk the Good Friday Agreement. Now, he may have changed his mind since. So if MAGA's still in control, maybe, we don't know. But the Irish lobby is still very powerful in America, even with a lot of influence over the Republicans, even maybe Trump. I am just thinking maybe something have changed because of the way Trump was quite rude to Martin when he visited earlier this year, wasn't he? St. Patrick's Day visit. So maybe that will change. So maybe Farage will not have America inflict economic sanctions on the UK, but the EU could. The EU could. Because remember, Farage also wants to do a load of other things. He wants to withdraw support from Ukraine. So literally, why would the EU try and come to any sort of arrangement with Farage when he wants to withdraw support from European security? We know he's a Russian asset, right? He doesn't want a close relationship with the EU on trade. He wants to actually throw those trade barriers back up. And he wants to withdraw from human rights laws and refugee laws. So he also wants Britain refusing to do its fair share with asylum. And asylum is a big issue all through Europe. Literally, what is the reason for Europe to even want to come to an agreement with Farage as Prime Minister? They wouldn't. So they will be more than happy. If he's going to knacker our trade, if he's going to knacker European security by siding with Russia, literally, why wouldn't the EU apply economic sanctions? Remember, the reason why the Tories agreed to the Windsor Framework was because if we didn't implement the Northern Ireland Protocol, come up with some practical way to do it, we were going to be facing economic sanctions from the EU. And neither Sunak nor, quite frankly, the rest of his party. Because remember, he easily won the vote in Parliament. There were like 10 or 11 Tories, including Boris Johnson, who tried to vote it down. Didn't work because the vast majority of them went, yeah, we do not want a trade war with the EU. SFAT's there saying Sinn Féin, wasn't it SDLP back then? No. No, Sinn Féin have always been the largest Republican nationalist party. But anyway, I'll go through some comments. I've been ranting a lot here. But it does my head in that it's so simple to debunk his stuff and it's just not happening. The media aren't doing it. The media are just not doing it. Even Labour, although they're doing it, I saw Nick Thomas-Symonds attacking Farage today. But even then, he didn't do it specifically. All he said was, oh, snake oil salesman, easy answers, blah, 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 blah. I'm just thinking, why aren't you pointing these simple things out? Why? Why are Labour not saying, oh, yeah, 10 billion to remove 600,000? The Tories were spending 10 billion to get rid of 1,000. And all they actually got rid of was 6. And they were voluntary. Although they didn't spend 10 billion, they spent 700 million. But 700 million on 6 people, removing 6 people. Ridiculous. Reggie there saying there don't need to be 600,000 people. All it needs is for some people to think there are 600,000. Yes, exactly. Which is why you asked the question. It's exactly it. The reason Farage is getting away with this, it's not even that he's identified a real problem and his solution won't work. The problem's not real. Even him saying he's going to remove 600,000 people, in people's heads means, oh, that must be how many asylum seekers there are. Or even over a 5-year period. No, there's not. There's nowhere near. Nowhere near. But that's what he's doing. That's the con he's playing. By even talking about 600,000, he is suggesting that that's how many asylum seekers there are. And people go, oh, 600,000 asylum seekers, that's far too much. There's 28,000. And as I say, at the moment, the stats are about half of them are failing. So like, it's 14,000 really. About. And that's at the moment. It could go up a bit. You know, there has been an increase in refugee crises in the last few years. That might continue. Puritas saying he's allowed 5 years to get this done, but Labour have had a year and they've made progress, but according to him, they've failed. Oh yeah, it'll be totally different then as well. And you may think to yourself, because I know I've said one of my hopes is that people pay attention to what's going on in America. I think it's going to be, in 2 years' time, I think it's going to be difficult to look at America and not see a complete shit show. So part of me thinks, hopefully people will look at that and go, we don't want the same thing in Britain. But I'm not convinced that that will definitely happen, because it didn't even happen in America. I will cast your minds back. Trump, in his first term, never mind now, in his first term, didn't deliver on any of his promises, did he? His big promises, right? Didn't deliver them. Big promise, building the wall with Mexico and making Mexico pay for it. Didn't do it. You know, he promised to drain the swamp. That implied, heavily implied, getting rid of all the establishment figures in politics. Didn't do it. It's the same people in Congress now as was then. All the same hangers-on. Didn't remove any of them. It's all the same. Nothing changed under Trump. Well, not for the better, but none of the things he promised... Oh, am I buffering? That's not good. None of the things he promised were delivered. And yet, I'll point this out. Yes, he lost the election. He did lose the election. But I will point this out. More people voted for Trump in 2020 than in 2016. In fact, more people voted for Trump in 2020 than for any presidential candidate in history, apart from Biden the same year. It was only because Biden got even more that year that Trump lost, realistically. But, you know, so what I'm saying is Trump provably failed on his own big platform policies. He didn't build the wall. He didn't get Mexico to pay for it. He didn't drain the swamp by any measure. He didn't do any of these things. But he still didn't lose any support. And that's the worry with Reform UK. It's not that we may have to hunker down for 5 years with them in government hope that because they'll have a load of incredibly inexperienced MPs, they won't be able to do very much, and just hope we can come out the other side. No, that won't happen. Even if they did absolutely lose the next election, which I would hope they would, what replaces it may not be better. It doesn't automatically mean what replaces it's better, or even significantly better. But also the damage that can be caused even by inaction, because government is very competitive. Every country in the world has or most countries in the world have a government that is pushing their own national interest, as they should. So if you have a government of a major economy that doesn't have its own country at heart, then you'll get eaten up by the competition, because every other, even partners, right? They are partners. We have partners, but they're also competitors. You know, the EU Commission, what's their first priority? The EU. The French government, what's their first priority? The French national interest. The Italian government, what's their priority? The Italian national interest. The German national interest, right? So we will have a government that does not put the national interest first, just like America has now. America is going to be destroyed, or it's risking being destroyed. It's certainly going to be in a much worse position in a few years' time. So immense amounts of damage. But there we go. If Farage wants to reduce migration, why doesn't it rejoin the EU? Well, it's quite interesting. So Raphael Baer, who's a bit of a commentator, who's quite a sensible one, is writing a piece for The Guardian saying, you know, Farage is getting a free ride here because Labour don't talk openly about the damage Brexit did. Because wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it be refreshing if Labour felt that they could say, this problem, the small boats problem, didn't exist before Brexit. So it's actually, if Labour could openly say, this problem was caused by Farage, why would you believe he's got the solution? It's his problem. If Labour could just openly say that, wouldn't that be refreshing? I'm not saying they should, by the way. There's all sorts of ifs and buts to it. But that would be interesting, wouldn't it? If Labour could just openly come out and say, this small boats problem, do you know why it is? Do you know why it suddenly took off after Brexit? It's because it's the I mean, we know it's a few other things as well, but it was the unravelling of our agreements with the EU that stoked it. There were other factors as well, if we're being honest, but that was a big one. So yeah. GOP lost a super safe plus 11.5 Iowa seat yesterday. GOP and Trump have a major problem. Yes, we have to hope that that problem remains. Remember, they have plans for the midterms. Now, I'm not going to be one of these doom and gloomers going, oh, they're just going to steal the midterms or not have the midterms, you know, at all. But there is a concerted effort to make sure that they stack the odds in their favour. Remember, the interference is not yet in place yet. So, sorry, I put the word yet twice in there. SFAX there saying 1998 Stormont election, UUP 28, SDLP 24, DUP 28, Sinn Féin 18. That really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You are overlooking something, yeah. If you go back to the Good Friday Agreement negotiations, who were the people leading it for Northern Ireland? It was the UUP and Sinn Féin. It wasn't the SD. I mean, everyone was involved, don't get me wrong. And the SDLP were very much in favour. But the key figures you saw were UUP and Sinn Féin. One interesting thing is if Reform did win, they'd have to do something about the House of Lords or make about 400 new Lords. Well, here's the thing, you see. What you'll find it, a lot of people attracted to Reform UK, I mean, this is where they might, because when I say that people still supported Trump, that is because, remember, Trump was just one person, whereas most of the Republicans stayed the same. So they were at least competent. They were evil but competent. Whereas Nigel Farage would get literally hundreds of new MPs who don't know what they're doing, right? Because at the moment he's got 5 MPs. Again, I keep saying, come the next election, if he is on for a majority, he'll probably win some by-elections. So he might have about 10 MPs. He might also get some defections from the Tories. Maybe he'll have 20. Maybe he'll have 20 Reform UK MPs, so he might have some experience. But that's not even enough to fill the cabinet, let alone the government. So he will have very, very inexperienced MPs trying to run the country. And what you'll find is, and what his supporters will find is, even if you've got a policy, doesn't make it happen. Like Labour have a policy to build a load of new houses, 1.5 million new homes. Well, they can't just snap their fingers and then spring out the ground. It's one thing to have a policy, it's another to have a plan. And the Reform UK don't have a plan. So there'll be a lot of things they can do by just snapping their fingers. Yes, there will be some laws they can pass. Might struggle through the House of Lords, but they'll be able to do it. But there'll be some things that actually are not just a case of snapping your fingers. And it won't be as easy as they think. And I am telling you, Nigel Farage will not be deporting 600,000 people. But it's a bit like, I'm always reminded, so I'm going to have to finish it in a moment. I'm always reminded of Billy Connolly one time when he was talking about sharks. And he said the thing about, like, I think he might have been, I don't know if he was talking about the great white specifically or just man-eating sharks in general, is he said apparently they don't like the taste of humans, right? Because usually when they attack humans, they think we're a seal or something, splashing about. So they don't like the taste of us, apparently. I didn't know they had such a refined palate, but we'll go with it. We'll assume it's true. But what he said was, he said the problem is, but by the time they realise this, they've already bitten you into 3 bits. You're already in pieces, right? It's too late for you. And that's the problem with Reform UK, if they did form a government. It may well be that Reform UK supporters turn on them really very quickly. The problem is that is scant satisfaction to the rest of us, because by the time their supporters realise that Nigel Farage actually is just, a paper tiger, it's too late. He's in power for years. He'll be in power for 5 years. Because that's the problem with a government that's really unpopular. It's got 5 years. You only have an election sooner if they think they can win. You can't force a government to fall on its sword earlier than 5 years. But anyway, Aaron there says, sorry, jumping around a little with the topics, Phil's all over the place, so we find it's all connected. But it is all connected. You discuss one thing and then that feeds into another and another and another. Because the problem is, ultimately, just to summarise, Farage's plans cannot work. It's really easy to point out the problems and he will have no answer to that. If the EU says you're not flying in our airspace, and any commercial airlines that use that take your contracts, we will not allow them to operate in the EU, even for tourism, right? What's he going to do then? Nothing. He'll moan. He'll whine. Oh, it's the EU stopping us. Yeah, do you know what? They hold all the cards, right? But you could go into other areas. The cost, £10 billion. He's saying that because, actually, Raphael Bear made this point, but it's really obvious anyway. You don't need someone who's a bit of an intellect to make the point. He's saying £10 billion because that sounds impressive to ordinary people, because £10 billion is a lot of money, right? So it sounds like, oh yeah, you could solve the problem with £10 billion. That's a lot of money. But it's not so much money that you can't put it into a budget, because tax revenues in the UK are over 1,100 billion, right? So 10 billion sounds like a small part of the budget, but a big amount of money. That's how it works. But it's not. It wouldn't come close to touching this. He couldn't deport 600,000 people, even if the EU didn't apply these sanctions for £10 billion. It's an absolute nonsense. He ain't got a plan. But the problem is, by the time you're doing it, by the time people realise that he can't actually do it and he starts coming out with the excuses, it's too late. He's in power. And the damage will be immense. America is not going to recover from the damage Trump is doing right now. Even if he did keel, let's say he keeled over tomorrow. People keep hoping for it. It's not going to happen. But let's say. And let's say Vance took over, but he was shit. And he was like, the Republicans turned on him. And, you know, some mad thing happened. And you had an early election and like the Democrats won or something. Let's just say that this Trump nightmare ended this year. It's not going to happen, but let's say. America's still not going to recover from this damage for a very long time. And neither would we. And America has a better chance of recovering because it hasn't yet lost its dominance in the world. We don't have it to begin with. King Charles could dismiss a government. No, he couldn't. Not realistically. Again, a constitutional monarchy doesn't actually, it behaves constitutionally. So the monarchy that tries to usurp power will end itself. So no, Charles is no protector here. If Nigel Farage, if Reform UK have voted a majority, that's it. We're stuck with them for 5 years. But there it is anyway. Vance is even worse. He's controllable by the billionaires. He could well be even worse, but he doesn't have the charisma. So the MAGA project, when we don't know, and I don't want to be glib, but it's very likely if Trump was out of the picture that the MAGA project has a limited shelf life. So there we go. But anyway, thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Sorry, impromptu stream. We may do the odd other one, but I just feel at the moment, every time I come on, it's literally going to be talking about this, so I may not do it every day. But thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day, and until next time, I'll see you later.